Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of The Secret Origins of Mint Condition. I am James, and with me is Joe.
Good morning, folks.
And Chris.
Hi there.
And we have two special guests, friends of the show, Josh Bernhard.
Good morning.
And John Whittemore.
Hey, everyone.
And we are gathered, or should I say regathering today to talk about Babylon 5, which Mint Condition brought all of us in this podcast together. But Babylon 5 was something that also brought all of us together. We have a long history that we could talk about with Babylon 5 that hopefully we will get to in this episode. But beyond that, at the time of this recording, a few weeks ago, JMS announced that he is rebooting Babylon 5, and he is going to be show running it, and he is currently in the process of writing the pilot. Is going to be on CW. And as far as we know, other than that, we have John Sheridan returning as a character. We don't know what else is going on. So I thought to kick us off today, since we were all kind of chatting about it offline, let's go around and just get everyone's reactions to the news of the reboot. I'm gonna turn it over to our guests first. So Josh, why don't you give us your first impressions about the news of the reboot?
Yeah, of course. Just really quick, I don't know that it's confirmed that John Sheridan is returning as a character. The announcement sort of had a log line for what B5 is about, and it mentioned John Sheridan as the main character. I don't know that that means that the character is being recast and returning. But that's something that we can get into a little bit later. My initial reaction was kind of shock, frankly. And I'm not going to lie. I had some mixed feelings about it, just because, like you were saying, James, I think for a lot of us, I know certainly for myself, the original series of Babylon 5, which is a strange thing to say, but the original B5 was very formative to me. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that I really internalized a lot of the philosophy and morality and even politics. Frankly, I think a lot of what the original show was infused with. I think it really left a big impact on me at that tender age. 93, 94 to 98 was, I was 10 to 14, 15 years old. So it certainly left quite an impression. And yeah, the idea of rebooting that show sort of left me a little uncertain. But then I think, JMS has subsequently said online that, he's sort of approaching it as kind of a reimagining, in the vein of the new Battlestar Galactica and its relationship to the original Battlestar Galactica, where it's not a straight up, storyline for storyline, by the numbers remake. It's sort of more getting into the DNA of the original show and using that as a launching pad for a new exploration of those same themes, but one that, reflects modern concerns and sensibilities. And so, that said, if he has an idea that he's excited about, and I believe that he does, because I don't think he would agree to do something that he didn't think he could have his heart fully in. I'm really curious, and I have gotten excited. I've gotten very excited about it, and that's what I will say about that.
That sounds good. So, John, let's get your impressions of it.
So I actually remember talking to Josh about it, within a day or two of the news. And similarly, I went through sort of an entire emotional journey, an arc of my own. Initially, it was just sort of disbelief because I couldn't imagine it being real, a headline like that. And then sort of that typical fanboy reaction of, don't mess with what's already there. And that probably lasted a few hours, maybe a whole day. And then next up, all of a sudden, it switched. I started remembering various passages from JMS' autobiography, Becoming Superman, which I recommend to everybody who's a Babylon 5 fan, even though it only covers only a chapter or two specifically on Babylon 5. But you see his journey as a person, as a writer. And for me, when he talked about Babylon 5 and how they basically gave this wet behind the ears writer with no production experience the keys to the kingdom as an executive producer, writer, and showrunner, and that now he's coming back, decades later with years of experience. I don't know. Something just has said to me, there's going to be something here. He's going to be able to do something in a way that he didn't have the ability to before. And when you do read his autobiography, you realize the stories that are in this man with this incredibly complex life full of its own crazy stories, that I really think there's going to be something new and magical here. And I don't have any idea what it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be the Babylon 5 that we grew up with. And repeating what Josh said, this was a show that was so formative to me. The first sci-fi show that I think I saw with a story arc continuing that just built and gave me excitement every week for some mystery that was unfolding that I couldn't predict, that I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was super excited to be along for the ride. And that's the same feeling I have right now. A little bit of caution, obviously, because it's a new show and it's the CW network, so we don't know how they're going to, involve themselves in that. But yeah, I'm just super excited now.
Well, that's great. We'll just keep going around the room and then we'll reflect on each other. So, Chris, what are your impressions or thoughts?
Sure. I think my reaction was much less complex because I wasn't as invested in B5. It wasn't, as an artist, it didn't inform a lot of my artistic choices, sensibilities, that sort of thing. As John said, I think everybody absolutely has to read Becoming Superman. I think it's really terrific and offers a lot of insight into his life, into his creativity, and a lot of other things too. But so the reason I say all that is because I really respect the man as a creator and as an artist. I am personally of I don't want to say the belief because that makes it sound a little too heavy. I'm very much one of those people who likes an ending to a story. I've talked about this a couple of times now. It's one of the reasons I've really pulled back from comic books is that so many of them don't actually end. They just keep going. It's one of the reasons I'm such a huge fan of The Expanse is because it ends. It was always planned to end. It's going to end in book 9 and season 6, coming November, December, respectively. So I like that stories end. I'm good with Babylon 5 being done. I don't really miss it. I guess I'm happy with it the way it is. But if he feels he has more story to tell, then I respect that. I'm sure he'll do really good work with it. I'm not particularly interested, not because I don't think it will be good, but because I had sort of already closed in my brain, I had sort of already closed the book on those stories. I sort of felt the same way about Harry Potter. All the issues that I have with the multitude, literal multitude of issues I have with J.K. Rowling aside, and how I don't purchase anything that she's created because I don't want to give her my money, frankly. The Harry Potter books ended up meaning a lot to me, and I love the Harry Potter books. I did not need the play. I ended up reading the play because it's out there and I had a copy, so why not? I didn't like it, but I also didn't need it from the get-go because that story had ended. I missed the characters, and I thought I wanted more, but that's, I think, the difference between me as a kid, a teenager, even as a young adult, me now, is that I used to, because I wanted more, that meant I needed more. I don't feel that way anymore. I'm going to miss The Expanse when it's gone, but I'm also certain I will be done with it, and I will not want more Expanse because I'm good with an end of the story. So I think it's a bit odd that he's revisiting, but I agree with John and Josh. I think there's a lot that he probably wanted to do with the series that he wasn't able to do. I think CW is an extremely odd choice, and it's possible that the only reason that he's on CW is because that's where he was able to make the only way he could make the deals. If you read the book, you would know that he's extremely protective of his property, and he is a man with a lot of integrity. And so it makes sense to me that, yeah, I don't have a problem with him doing it. It's just that I don't feel the need to revisit that universe, those stories. And in my mind, it's kind of like, okay, I don't have a problem with you doing that. This is not at all accurate. This is completely projection, just me. And I'll be the first to admit that. But it feels like we get limited time with our artists, JMS included. And so it feels like, because he's going to be spending a lot of time on New Babylon 5, that, again, all projection, that robs us of other stories he might have shared with us. And that's not fair to him, because he's a person who's not here for our service, right? He's not here to serve us. But that was my initial gut reaction that I recognize as being selfish and not really reasonable. So will I watch it when it comes out? Yeah, if it's convenient. But but I'm just not excited about it. I'm not particularly interested in it. That said, I'm certain it's going to be good. I am. I'm just certain that he's not coming back unless it's something good and strong and new too. I don't think he's going to come back and just rehash stuff. But remaking it, sort of quote remaking an entire series, yeah, it's just I'm fine without this.
All right, that's good. Those good impressions. Again, we'll expand upon that. And Joe, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm more in line with what Chris just said. I'm from the generation of, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So I'm a little shocked that this is coming back. I have no, what's the word I'm looking for here? I should say I completely have complete faith in JMS to tell this story again the way he sees, the way he wants to. I have complete other faith in his creative acumen, but why? And the bigger why is, why on the CW? I mean, this is a network that caters to 16-year-old TikTok teeny boppers. And I don't get it. I mean, yeah, he may have been given complete control, but will the budget be there? Will he really have control, or will he have to service the quote unquote fans of this network? And if that happens, then I think there could be disaster.
Hey, Joe, just Josh, I think just wanted to mention something before you finish your Josh. Mm-hmm. What were you going to bring up?
Josh?
Did we lose Josh?
We did. Sorry.
No, he's muted. There we go.
You're muted, Josh.
I apologize. No, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to be in the queue for when Joe is finished. So.
Okay. No problem.
So please continue.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's about. That's basically it. I like Chris. I don't think we need this. I'm sure it will be good, though. If, from the standpoint of the creator, I'm sure it will be good. But I'm worried that the creator, JMS, may not have as much freedom as he thinks, or have the avenues to put his product forth, to put his story forth, because it's on this network. So, I hope they prove me wrong, but I'm not. I don't want to say I'm not looking forward to it, but I don't really need it. So I'm gonna leave it at that.
Josh, did you want to follow up on something that Joe said before I'll give my impressions and we move into a wider conversation?
Well, no, actually, why don't you go ahead? I apologize.
No, it's fine. We've got a lot of us on the podcast, so we're all figuring it out. Yeah. So my impressions are, I'm definitely interested in seeing what it is, and exciting to see what JMS will do with material he's already worked with. Reading Becoming Superman, again, I'll plug it too. Great book. I highly recommend it to anyone listening who hasn't read it and is interested in JMS as a creative person reading that book. But having read that book, I didn't realize, I've grown up with JMS's storytelling all the way up until now. I grew up with him watching He-Man, then watching The Real Ghostbusters, then watching Babylon 5, and then reading Spider-Man, Rising Stars, Midnight Nation, Thor, and reading his Superman run. So I've been reading JMS's work up until
his biography. James, are you still there?
Did we lose James?
I think we might have lost James. He was getting kind of, I don't know about you guys, it was getting a little robotic and
yes, that's what I thought it was my headphones, but it was, yeah.
Okay. I know we're on the clock, so James will be back, I'm sure. Yeah. I'm going to shoot him a text, but in the meantime, let's go ahead and keep recording some of this. So really quickly, Josh, I wanted to return to sort of where you're at, because you had your hand up, and it sounds like they're almost, I I don't want to say two sides to this because everybody here loves Babylon 5, but we sort of have our own things we're looking forward to or not. So Josh and John, sort of, I want to circle back to you guys and see if there's a sort of rebuttal, a kind of way you wanted to follow up with that. But starting with Josh, please.
No, yeah, sure. First off, I just want to say I am completely sympathetic to what both you, Chris, and you, Joe, are saying. I think that's sort of one of the things that I was hinting at was this idea that I don't need another Babylon 5. I have the original. I love the original, and as John was mentioning, the revolutionary thing about Babylon 5, certainly for American television, was that it was a novel for television with a beginning, middle, and an end. We got the end. But that said, both you, Chris, and Joe have been mentioning, the CW and why is JMS returning to this this property, and why specifically on the CW. From what I understand, and I should mention as an aside that I'm a patron of JMS's Patreon, so he has been talking about this as frankly as he's able to, with a project that's in active development. But from what I understand, the CW approached him, and I don't think that he was really, I don't think it was a situation of he had an idea for a reboot of B5 and he went out to try to shop it around and sell it. I think that Warner Brothers, obviously they own the rights to Babylon 5, and earlier this year they released the HD remasters on HBO Max, and I think they were impressed with how well it performed. And from what JMS has said, there are a lot of huge B5 fans at the CW, so they approached him with this idea. Would you be interested in rebooting it for TV? And he basically he said yes, but with certain stipulations. And one of the things that he said, which I find very fascinating, is this idea that he wants to be narratively very experimental and kind of explore some modes of storytelling on television, the same way that the original show did. And he just wanted to make sure that they were on the same page, that if he were to revisit the show, I mean, number one, it's a beloved show that has a lot of fans, and that he really needs it to be what he wants it to be. And they said, yeah, they understood that this was a unique situation, and they, from what he said, they seemed to understand that the original, what made it unique and why it was a special thing, and that they seem completely supportive of what he has in store. So, so the answer why the CW, it's because the CW came to him, and so we'll see.
Interesting. I was thinking about that, Josh, last night, that because I did read that. You're right. I read that they came to him, and could this be the CW trying to change their image? I mean, they've already hit a home run with Superman and Lois as a more adult show, a show that has deeper, better fleshed out characters than, say, The Flash, Supergirl, Batwoman, DC Legends. So it's possible maybe hopefully they're trying to change their image and go for an older audience, and maybe that's why they're thinking about this. But even so, I'm still going to have reservations about it until I see it.
No, I mean, yeah, I'm with you. Like, I think Look, I mean, the elephant in the room here is that this is the nature of popular media right now, and TV and film. It's all about IP. It's all about name recognition, and it's all about having a built-in fan base. I read on Twitter yesterday or the day before, somebody asked him, why not just do like a sequel series, like Star Trek: The Next Generation to the original Star Trek, and JMS said something to the effect of, well, Babylon 5 doesn't have the cultural presence that the original Star Trek had, so it's sort of like reading between the lines, it seems like this was the only way that it would happen. This. This is what. This is sort of the name of the game. Like we were discussing off air about Star Wars. The nature of franchise TV and media is that at the end of the day it's a commercial enterprise, and I think that is the only reason that this is happening. So if you can accept that, then you can sort of set that aside and enjoy it for whatever it's going to be. But that's sort of the buy-in, right? You have to be on board with the idea that because of the nature of the business, it's not a question of do we need more. It's you will be getting more. We will be getting more. More will be made. So with that as sort of the buy-in, what will the quality of the more turn out to be? I think that's
and
sorry,
I want to not to interrupt, but really quickly. So I appreciate what you're saying, Josh, and it sort of lines up. I think the what you're both saying, frankly, lines up with sort of, again, don't want to say two sides to the argument, but almost two sides to the coin, kind of. Anyway, the reason I wanted to cut in here though is because there's a lot of talk about CW and JMS's integrity and how he is protective of his property, but also of his reputation and the story that he's trying to tell. And so, to that end, John, I think you can speak a little bit more on that, because it seems like it's really sort of I don't want to say integral, but it's one of those really main points that's going to, I think, be discussed a lot moving forward. Is okay, why the CW and why now? So, John, if you wouldn't mind sharing some of those thoughts you've got. You're still on mute, John.
Yeah, John, you can see me on mute.
There we go.
I was thinking that we almost need to look backwards before looking forwards with this, because JMS has an interesting history, and it's very checkered. And he writes about it himself, and we've experienced it. He went on from Babylon 5 had unexpected production issues to Jeremiah onwards, all the way to Sense8, which didn't originally get its ending and then did, but certainly didn't get its full season run. And then when you look at Crusade right after Babylon 5, there were a series of interactions he had with studios that really, for lack of a better term, screwed him over at various points. And that's a fairly common experience that he's had. So I'm not sure whether this is going to mean he's a little more world-weary and experienced for that, or whether we still have to be on the lookout. Because as far as I know, CW doesn't have some grand, amazing management that stands out in the industry as really backing their artists and backing great visions. So skepticism is natural in this case. He's protective of his image, but I think that goes insofar as he would be willing to walk away at any point where he felt that vision of his was being damaged or sullied in any way. So that's sort of the timeline we don't want to see happen, is a Babylon 5 reboot that doesn't go well because of studio interference, and then he just walks away and shuts it down. That's sort of the worst case scenario, and not one that we should discount entirely. But given that the CW approached him, he's much older and experienced now. I think there's a little room for cautious optimism in terms of the production side of this. It really does seem that the CW is trying to attempt at different things, because let's face it, the streaming market is changing so much right now, and it's consolidating into the big players, and everybody's scrambling to get something, either particular intellectual properties or just an overall idea of what they are, to establish that. I think the CW may be, trying something different. We just may not know what it is yet. But as for actually doing a new show with a new network, if you have your own, carte blanche intellectually, that's the brilliance of Babylon 5 in the first place, is that he actually snuck it in. He didn't tell the executives what he was planning on doing. He basically sold it to the studio as a Star Trek on a station, serialized stories, and almost in a very stealthy way wove in that novel-like story arc that took place over 5 seasons. And execs were none the wiser until it was already too late. And that kind of savvy is something you don't see with people every day. And I wonder if he's now playing a sort of three-dimensional chess when producing shows that we're not even aware of. I wouldn't put it past him. So that's why I think at the very least we're going to get something interesting, especially if, as Josh was saying, he's trying new types of storytelling narratives. We may get things that we weren't expecting or anticipating, and they may be great, they may not be, and that's what I'm sort of excited for, because a lot of new things fall flat the first time. But just like the way Babylon 5 set a new possibility for storytelling on television, we may be in the run for something like that again.
Cosign. I love everything you just said.
Yeah, and I would say just going JMS's, what JMS is going on in the past. I mean, he walked away from Thor when he didn't want Thor going into the rest of the Siege plotline that Marvel wanted. So I think if he's not, if something's not playing ball with JMS, he does have the history of walking away. But hopefully, entering into this new, paradigm with CW and the new show, he's like John said, he's a little bit more wary, and he kind of knows the business, and he's kind of thought all this stuff ahead. But it is interesting what you said earlier, Joe, about Lois and Clark, or not Lois and Clark, but Superman and Lois went to HBO Max, and Babylon 5 is currently playing on HBO Max. So I wonder if things were to go wrong, or JMS thought the CW wasn't going the right way, it's something it can move over there, or maybe that's even something that's built into the current. Because where is it going to air once the first season is done? Is it going to go to the CW app? Is it going to go to HBO Max? So hopefully he's got some options laid out in his back pocket in case things don't go the way he wants with the network.
I have to believe that the only reason he's agreed to go ahead with this is because he has gotten, a sense, if not, real assurances, that they're going to let him do what he wants to do. I really have to believe that. Now, it is interesting that it's on the CW and not, direct to streaming as an HBO Max original, though. That probably has something to do with the fact that the CW approached him. So, I mean, the CW wanted it, which, and this has just occurred to me after, listening to what you said, Joe, about, are they trying to revamp their revamp their image? That hadn't occurred to me until you mentioned it. But the fact that they sought him out and they want something specifically for their air and not HBO Max, I'm starting to wonder if maybe you aren't onto something. I know that the CW has that show Pandora, which, full disclosure, I haven't watched a lot of, though I listened to a Star Trek podcast that the creator hosts, so I sort of know a lot about it through osmosis. Pandora is kind of a space opera show. It is pitched a little bit younger. The leads were sort of they had just graduated the academy, and were sort of off on their first adventures, so they were youthful in the first season. Pandora was just renewed for a third year, which suggests to me that they think that maybe there is a future in space operas on their network. So maybe this kind of dovetails with that, and maybe this is sort of potentially a more mature version of the success that they have had with the younger skewing Pandora. The other interesting thing is that once again, I read on Twitter, somebody tweeted at JMS similar concerns about, like, is Sheridan going to be, like a teenager or whatever, like, or all this. And, JMS said something to the effect of, we're talking about a military commander. Logic says that he will not. We're not talking about teenagers here. So, once again, if you read the tea leaves of that, it makes it sound like there isn't a mandate for youthfulness. But then again, a full caveat, have no actual idea. But yeah, so that you might be onto something there.
Well, remember, this is the network that, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, maybe even more than that, tried to give us the Lone Ranger and Tonto as teenagers. And that didn't last more than probably even half a season. So that's why.
I'm glad I have no memory of that.
Yes. I watched the first episode and I said, that's it. Because I loved the Lone Ranger growing up, as I did in the 60s. It was one of my heroes. But, again, yeah, this maybe they are trying to change their image. And let's face it, if they even ran the original B5 on the CW now, it would be miles ahead of anything else that they've ever had on this network. So, I'll give it a chance. I did say I didn't need this reboot, but I have complete faith in JMS. But I wish it was on HBO Max. And as James said, maybe he's got a plan B. Maybe that's where we'll wind up. So let's keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah, no. Hopefully, he definitely has a plan. Chris, I think I saw you wanted to interject something also.
Sure. No, just that. I think we've all. I'm really, really glad to hear this conversation unfolding the way that it is, because as an artist, it's super important to me to be like, yes, we're voicing and sharing our opinions. At the end of the day, the man is an artist, and his art is, it's not meant to serve us, and so I'm glad we're all on the same page of no, he should do what he wants to do, and we'll respect that, even if we have our concerns about it. That's our problem, not his. And so I'm really glad to hear that too, and I would expect no less from everybody on this podcast. But I'm just saying, I'm glad to hear that this is not like laying down ultimatums for an artist like we've seen happen so many times. As frustrated as I may have in the past been with George R.R. Martin before I quit Game of Thrones, reading specifically, I never really watched the show. But he, if he doesn't finish the story, he doesn't finish the story, and that's, his prerogative is to work on what he wants to work on. But all of that aside, the one thing I will be very curious to see is, I've recently, in preparation for this conversation, but also in the wake of reading Becoming Superman, I started rewatching Babylon 5. It's been a shtick for me lately because I'm also rewatching The Expanse, so what the hell, I'm all in. But it's what I'll be curious to see is, who are they going to cast? I want to know who they're going to cast, because some of that acting was so rough, and there's some of it I felt like I knew when I was younger. I appreciate when I was younger, but since working as a professional actor, since running my own theater company, literally there have been, and it's not often, but every now and then I will stop an episode because I'm cringing too hard. I'm just like, I just need a moment away. I'm really desperately uncomfortable. And that sounds really dramatic, I know, but just from my perspective, I'm sitting there going like, I can't, I need a break. I need something to wash this down or something. I don't know. I need a break.
Just out of curiosity, would you be willing to name names? Who who exactly was so gave such a cringeworthy performance that you had to take a break from it? I'm just curious.
So there were a couple. There are times when, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to remember actor names. But the biggest one was probably, and this is also sort of covered. This is also covered in Becoming Superman. We find out about Michael O'Hare and his personal struggles, and I'm sure that his personal struggles with his mental health impacted his acting. Um, but it drove me up a wall sometimes. It just felt very performative,
That's
and
interesting.
and and it's again, I don't, and this is where sometimes there's overlap because some of the writing I felt was a little bit cringy too. It was a little also too performative. Like, yeah, okay, like that's enough small talk. I get we're relationship building, but it doesn't feel like relationship building. It feels like you are trying to build relationships here, and there is a fine line as a writer. And as a writer, I'm way less experienced. I'm far more guilty of the former than the latter of looking like I'm trying to build relationships versus actually building relationships through dialogue. But Michael O'Hare was a big one. There are times when the actor who plays Garibaldi,
Jerry O'Doyle.
thank you,
Or
Jerry,
Jerry Doyle.
Jerry
Okay.
Doyle,
Jerry
thank
Doyle.
you. Yeah, there are times where I just the JMS hands him a monologue,
Hmm.
and I'm like, wow, he's just acting the hell out of that monologue, and so it's things like that that really and oh hell, the actor who plays the doctor,
Richard Biggs.
Richard Biggs, really like him in general, really enjoy him in general, but there's almost, and this is where again I don't know if it's the direction that he received to act more like the way his father acts, so we can see that family resemblance or what, but there are times where I'm just like, whoa, that's some fire you're spitting that doesn't really seem to fit the situation. Like it doesn't really become the angry black man with the something to prove trope. I don't think it becomes that. Um, but there's just a lot of anger that he's spitting there sometimes that I'm just like, okay, I don't think we needed it to go that far. So rarely did I cringe for him. It was more the other two that I would cringe for, and again, it was not frequently. It's not like all right, take another breath. We're going under, Chris. We're gonna watch another 7 minutes of this episode. It wasn't that bad, but there were definitely those moments there where I just I sort of had to back away from it. So I wasn't a huge fan of some of the acting. I would like to see who they bring in, and then the writing too. Some of the dialogue again felt a little bit like it was forcing relationship building or being indicative of relationship building rather than being actually relationship building. And so those were moments that are admittedly very softened by, in my opinion, the nicer moments of connection. Like I recently rewatched the sort of the beginning of Delenn and Sheridan's relationship, and while some of it, like they're attempting to connect over culture, felt sort of forced and like odd couple esque, and I'm like, yeah, okay, that felt a little excuse me, a little heavy handed, both in terms of acting and writing. Then there are other moments where Delenn puts her hand on Sheridan's hand, and they both sort of look down, but instead of like pulling away quickly or like clearing their throats in a very sort of stereotypical, you know, meet cute sort of way, they connect and they stay connected. And even after they do break contact, that connection that they made is still there in a very nice, soft, in my opinion, understated way. So I think there was a lot of good stuff happening, but those are probably for me the things in which I am most interested in is, okay, how do you cast this? What kind of writing are we seeing? I want to see what that dialogue looks like. So that's me.
Yeah, no, that's all. Those are all good points, Chris, and I definitely agree with your sentiment about George Lucas made 1, 2, and 3, but it is his creation, and he has a right to make 1, 2, and 3. He has a right to make the prequels. So,
right. We don't need to send him to the Hague.
Right. I may not agree with 1, 2, and 3, and that's for a later conversation. But he's a right to, and so JMS is. But John, I know you have some thoughts on what we just discussed.
Yeah, it's so funny because the warning I give to people I recommend the show to is without trying to detract from it. I say, some of the acting is a little rough around the edges, particularly in that first season, and the sets definitely are. But again, when you get that insight into the production history, we didn't know when we were watching the show just how wet behind the ears JMS was.
Yes, yes.
To say he was thrown into the deep end of the pool is woefully inadequate as a metaphor. And the fact that he was able to pull off what he did is actually a miracle. But I do get that sense that it's almost like he's going almost over the top Shakespearean at certain times with those monologues, which I love, and especially at the time when we were watching that show in our lives. When you're adolescent, you sort of eat that stuff up because it's dramatic. It's great. As you get older, you can appreciate it, but you also see it as a little bit, just overdone and not, it doesn't quite work right. The beats are off. That's something that I think is really, gets experience really, polishes the edges off of that. So I don't think we're going to see those same issues because I certainly didn't see it in Sense8. I haven't seen it in his later work as much. And the monologues he gives fit even better. He uses what I would sort of call the Jakar technique. It's really called for. It's literally meant to be a moment when somebody is monologuing. So you get to go full out with that and get a full experience from it rather than it being sort of forced into a random moment. What I really wanted to say when I was thinking about this, when even Chris was mentioning, the artist, what they owe us and what they don't, I've begrudgingly come to the view that no, artists don't owe us anything. George R. R. Martin doesn't, as much as I would love him to finish the books. But the greatness of what we get to experience is more often because the artist got to do something that they saw, that they envisioned, that they were able to manifest. And then after the fact, the rest of us get to appreciate it. When we're part of the committee designing it and creating it as sort of, fan service, it definitely doesn't be, you're not going to get that new amazing experience that you might otherwise get. But that also brings up something about JMS and his own voice. Babylon 5 was very topical at the time in the 90s. I don't want to quite call it political, though maybe lowercase p political in a sense. It was societal and structural commentary about power, about human nature and the dangers we face in our own selves, as to giving into totalitarian tendencies with President Clark and the way that Earth goes completely off the rails while Sheridan and the station are the only ones representing the best of humanity until they, defeat the shadows and have to go back and save Earth. That's a message that when you bring it forward 20, 30 years later, resonates even more. And I think JMS is going to have a lot more to say. Following him both on Twitter and on other social media, it's interesting to watch his own evolution in that he's not looking to become a political pundit and obsess over a particular issue, even though he has very strong opinions that he does communicate on those issues. But I think based on where sort of humanity is right now, it gives them a whole new area to explore. And that's something that is really kind of cool. It's something that, Star Trek picks us up after humanity has gotten its stuff together. That's really where Star Trek is at. And JMS always said, yeah, I'm not so sure if we get there, that's the story I want to tell. And that's what I would expect from the new Babylon 5 would be, this is 2021 or when it comes out in the next couple of years. Like, where are we at and what are the stories that come out of that? And how do human beings really develop and deal with their own darker natures and, the difficult decisions they have ahead? So I think that just the amount of stories he's going to have to tell in that are amazing if he wants to take that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, John. He's got a lot of, I'm sure, new opinions and thought processes given what the world currently is now to like sort of rediscover, reopen, and reinterject, or just interject for the first time into the story of Babylon 5. So I'm sure his way of speaking about it and having his character speak about it has changed a lot. Joe, did you want to add something to what John said?
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit further when we were talking about the actors. Yeah, there was some cringeworthy moments, as Chris said, in that first season. Sometimes they seem to be stiff and or we're going overboard, chewing the scenery, so to speak. But the CW has a penchant for recycling their actors. I mean, some are good, like Cress Williams, who just unfortunately his show Black Lightning, which I thought was one of the better shows on the CW, was canceled. But I'm worried about who might be in the stable of actors that JMS has to choose from. I'm hoping that he has complete reign over that. If you want to see some, and you talk about Chris, you talk about having to stop and get through an episode. I'm trying to finish up the current season, the final season of Supergirl, and it takes 2 to 3 days to watch one episode because the acting is so terrible. You cannot imagine how bad the acting on this show is. Even Melissa Benoist, who started out very well, has now fallen into the trap of overacting, underacting. It's god awful, the acting on that show. So, that's why when I heard this JMS and Babylon 5 reboot CW, my head exploded because I know from what I've been with the CW since Arrow. The first few seasons were great, but it has a penchant for just putting people on the screen that are not well versed at their craft. And
this might be a good portion for us to. We kind of already done it, but to go into what we hope from the series, and maybe we've already gone into what we don't hope from the series. And speaking of like topics, like do we want the character of Jakar to come back, and would we want somebody recast as Jakar after what?
I think we lost James
again. To be continued.
He left us on a cliffhanger. I really wanted to hear what he was going to say.
Where do you think he was going with that?
Maybe he knows something that he's not supposed to share.
Right, right.
You are not ready
to hear this.
Or whatever the Vorlons say when they come in and they destroy Deathwatch.
There he goes. He just left, and I'm sure he's going to come right back.
He'll be right back.
It's super interesting to me. For me, Babylon 5, I think, is very much a show of the 90s.
Yes.
In a lot of ways.
Oh, definitely.
And I am wondering, it seems like JMS has the right approach of this. In that, I really feel like you need to make some fundamental changes in how you approach the story for it to resonate in the 2020s. It seems like he's of the same mind, just based on the things that he's said about it.
Sure.
But that is sort of, if I really want to get into it.
I like how you say that like you don't really want to get into it.
Yeah,
because every indication is you would very much like to get into it.
It's a commitment. That's
what we're here for.
Right, right. John's right.
So, there is a really interesting train of thought that I was thinking about, was that, like, the original Babylon 5, part of why it was so effective for a lot of people, for me certainly, was the fact that it really existed as a reaction to Star Trek. So, essentially, the reason that I started watching it when I was 10 years old was because it seemed like another show like Star Trek, and I really enjoyed Star Trek. And kind of like what you were saying, John, I think he was consciously playing into that idea that, you think how a show like this works, because then that gives him the opportunity to sort of knock the table over and really do some surprising things. Because
Josh, do you remember our conversations as we were beginning to piece that together and going, wait,
yes,
what's happening here? We think there's something going on, and we were just beginning to lose it. And it's
I know. I remember very well. I remember when, so obviously in small ways, just on at top of mind is the episode Believers from the first season, which is not a fantastic episode, but it is really an early example of um, of of doing an episode that you might see on Star Trek, but the ending of it is something Star Trek would never do. All the way through, later on when, spoiler alert, probably not needed at this point, but when Babylon 5 secedes from the Earth Alliance, we were trained from years of watching Star Trek to see, Starfleet and the Federation as the ultimate arbiter of morality. And so when we approach Babylon 5 in the same way, to all of a sudden say, well, wait a minute, that's not how this always works. Sometimes you, as an individual, need to, not follow orders and go out on your own because you see some injustices are happening, and like what the authorities say is not always the right thing, and you shouldn't always do what they tell you to do. Like the idea that the right thing was not what the that the good guys weren't always the good guys, and you had to sort of uh, do what's right in the face of a universe that was telling you to do the exact opposite and fall in line. I think it was a huge sort of a.
I think now we lost Josh.
No.
Oh.
Still here, I'm here.
Sorry, I didn't hear you for a second. I was like, oh, now it's stretching out.
No, I mean the idea that you would go against the authority that you had created and set up as the good guys was something that you would never see on Star Trek. The whole idea that they would turn their whole world upside down, and then all of a sudden it's okay. Well, now I'm not sure what the show is about.
Sure.
It's all of a sudden something completely other than what I went into expecting it was.
Well, and I think this is where, it goes back to what John said, because I think we all sort of have the same disclaimer, which is, yeah, there are going to be moments that the acting is rough, the set, you're absolutely right, John, the sets that they're working on can be rough, but hey, watch this thing. No, there are going to be the complaints that you might have, or complaints that a lot of people have. Trust me, keep watching the thing. Sorry?
We lost you for a second there.
Oh, weird. Okay. Yeah, so it is an internet thing today.
Sunspot activity.
Yeah. But it's worth watching despite its flaws. And I think, again, that's a testament to JMS and the crew that put B5 together, is that, because I feel the same way looking back now. I look back on some of the Farscape stuff and go, ooh, that's rough. Rougher than I thought it was when I first watched it. But it's still a story worth consuming, worth watching, because there is no perfect story out there. There's some that, in my mind, come closer than others, but rarely are they also stories that cover this span of time, right? Like, in my mind, Coco is nearly a perfect story. That's great. It's one movie. I still adore it, but it's not spread out over 5 seasons. So it's a higher standard to hold somebody to, an artist to. And so I think that, again, that is a testament to just how incredibly talented JMS is, that he created this thing that we say, yes, it's got flaws, but it is still worth watching. We know there's a lot out there that you can watch. Trust me, stick with this one. You will be grateful that you did. And that's not even mentioning the history that JMS created, because he's the first one to tackle something like this. We're going to tell a story. It's going to be over the course of 5 years. That is historic. That's making history, and that's really, really cool. And like you were saying, Josh, this idea of and John, you were both of you were trying to work out, like, oh my God, what are they doing? And you're starting to piece together that, yeah, they're going to do something that's never been never been done before, because we expect that, the like, much like the Federation, these are the good guys, and oh no, they're very much not the good guys, and they're not going to come around on this either. It's not just one person that's making all this rot. So there's a lot of, it's worth looking in historical context too, and I think that the more history we have of television, the harder it can be to recognize the context of what came before and what informed.
Oh gosh,
When
right,
I was
right when he was about to bring
when I
it
was
home.
I know. Oh,
sorry,
there he is.
when I was
No, we
director
lost you again.
when I was director of drama over at SUNY Alfred for a couple of years, we were talking about comedy. And it was, I had kids that were all trying to be funny, and I was trying to explain, the straight man and how the straight man fits into the workings and trappings of comedy. And so I showed them who's on first.
Oh, okay.
And there were things they didn't understand, things they didn't appreciate. And I had trouble articulating it because I grew up on Abbott and Costello.
Mhm.
So I had appreciated it. And even though it's not like I go back and watch a lot of their stuff now, I can appreciate their place in comedic history. So it's much the same way that the further we get away from the original, again, it is weird to say it, but the further we get away from the original Babylon 5, the easier it is to think that television was always this way, that it was always serialized in the way that it is today, where it's like, you really need to know what happened, just 2 episodes ago. No. This thing they're doing in the 4th season, it harkens all the way back to the 1st season. It's easy to think that's the way television.
I think we
always was,
lost
and
him
of course,
again.
that wasn't the case.
Oh, you always
You're dropping
come
out.
back right when Well, James, I see you have something to
Yes.
add.
Well, I was just going to say, like, Chris gave a good point there with Chris's saying, like, it's something we've never seen before, and we've kind of already touched on it in fits and spurts between all of us today. But it might be, with the time that we have for the podcast, to talk a little bit about how we got into Babylon 5 and were exposed to it. Because, like, when I did see it, John's recommendation was for me to watch it, and I know I resisted it in the beginning, John, for a while. It wasn't until Babylon 5 made its way to the TBS that I started watching, or TNT rather. TNT, I think, was the network that it launched
TNT.
on first. Yeah, it was the first time I had seen serialized storytelling like that in any TV show I was, like, watching regularly. So it was a big revelation for me, not in just terms of TV could be, but what writing and creativity could be. Because the only other time I was really seeing that regularly was when comic book storylines, and even back then, I was still trying to understand the continuity of some of the characters and histories I'm reading. So I think of I think Josh and John are the first people in this room who really got into B5. So John, why did you land on B5 when you did?
Similar to Josh, it was a show that was sci-fi oriented, but I didn't expect it. I didn't know it was happening. The first time I saw it was the actual pilot before the first season aired, and that was a good 9 months before the first season aired. I was walking my neighbor's dogs. There were 2 Shih Tzus that I took care of regularly, and the neighbor would go out of town, or he would call me sort of on the fly when he was going to be home late from work, go walk the dogs. And he sort of said he would be there for a while. And this is to a 13-year-old. He's like, so, make yourself at home there. I have a big screen TV. And it's 1992, 3-ish. And, big screen TVs were different back then, but it was still, like, awe-inspiring to see the setup that this guy had.
Yeah.
So I'd turn on that TV while the dogs were eating, while I was cleaning up, and doing all the things that I needed to do for them. And I just happened to come upon Babylon 5. And the weird thing is, the show struck me in that moment because I was watching it alone. And the way the house done had an aesthetic that was very 90s, which weirdly fit in with the show. So it just sort of all clicked as, this is something kind of cool and interesting to watch. I want to see where this goes. And then that was it. The pilot was over. I didn't know when it was going to come back. And then when I saw the news that the show had been picked up and that it was going to be coming on that fall, I was completely sold on it because something about the aesthetic, that music, that very, was it Christopher Frank?
Yes, Christopher Frank, yep.
That synthesized sensation. It was something that I hadn't really heard in a good way in a show. There's plenty of bad synthesized music from the 80s when it comes to TV. That just got me into it. So I started watching the show. Season 1 was great. I was talking to Josh about it a whole lot in season 1. And then Mint Condition played a huge role in it because it was Mr. Gross who was obsessed with the show. He was such a fan of that show. And I had no idea until he overheard a conversation, I think, between Josh and I. And he was just like, wait, we have to talk about this. So part of my sort of weekly sojourn to Mint Condition involved these long, amazing discussions with Mr. Gross. It was great. And there we were at the end of season 2, and I missed the season 2 finale. And this is in a time when you couldn't go back in time. If you didn't record it on VHS on your own, you couldn't just wait for it to, restream, just click the stream again or it'll replay next week. Nope.
I think we collectively refer to those as the dark days, John. The dark
days. Yes. And it was gone. So there was this big season 2 cliffhanger with Kosh and the Vorlons and Sheridan, and I had no idea what happened. And there Mr. Gross is saying, "You don't know what happened," and he didn't know whether to tell me and not to tell me. I remember that being sort of this hilarious moment. But there was a lot of, those cool interactions of people relating about the show and how mind-boggling they found it, storytelling-wise, because again, it had been something that we hadn't experienced on television yet. So I got to get a lot of that really fun. What I call sort of like show reaffirmation at Mint Condition, because there's a big component to watching a TV show that's very social. When you get to talk to somebody else about it, it's great to watch on your own. You get that experience, but once you get to share it with somebody else, that's when the real magic for me kicks in. Other shows have had that, and some haven't. It's probably why certain George R. R. Martin shows had this grand appeal, because they were so social. Had 10 people over to watch them, and why it was so devastating towards the end there. And Babylon 5 for me had such a similar experience in that it was a social experience for me. I got to talk to a ton of people about it and experience it through their eyes all at the same time. And that to me is the testament to when a show really is, touching on something, because then people really want to talk about it. And that's what I really hope for this new show, is that even if it's something different that we're not comfortable with, oh man, I hope we want to talk about it. I hope we want to just obsess over it, nitpick it, dissect it. That's so much fun for me.
Well, I'm sure with whatever it is, we're going to talk about it. Good.
Absolutely.
We're hoping for good, but we will easily pick it apart if it's bad too, I'm sure. But Josh, you came to it separately than John, or I guess you discovered it differently than John?
Yeah, I believe so. I think we came to it. I think we each discovered it independently, though. John and my history is very much intertwined with Babylon 5, so I can't say for certain. I do have a very strong memory of I was channel surfing on a Sunday, and I think I caught a rerun of the original pilot. I do have a very strong memory of watching the first episode of the series proper, Midnight on the Firing Line, and I know that I had some anticipation for it. It was kind of appointment viewing for me. So I'm going to say that I probably got wind of it through magazine coverage. I'm sure, one of the sci-fi mags that I got for Star Trek coverage was probably also covering B5. And it's probably, where I knew that it was coming as a series. Because I do have a distinct memory, like I said, of settling in to watch the very first episode, probably followed by either Time Tracks or Kung Fu: The Legend Continues. I don't recall which it was paired with, but it was a part of that.
Legend Continues.
Yeah. The group of those primetime entertainment network shows that failed experiment that almost cut B5 a year short. In the end, when that whole thing collapsed. But yeah, I'm gonna say I came to it. I was not a part of the burgeoning online community that. Again, something that we haven't touched on in terms of how far ahead of the curve JMS was. He was engaging with fans online. He was creating, fan community for the show before the show was even on. You know, and these days, like that's sort of de rigueur for TV writers and producers. Like, you know, you have to be on Twitter, you have to engage with the fans, and he was doing that before most people knew what the internet even was. And you know, I'm very glad that he's continued his engagement through Twitter, and I mean, again, like, you know, a big thing for me in terms of B5's influence on me and my life and my chosen career was, you know, frankly, reading the JMS Speaks section of the Lurker's Guide to Babylon 5, and, you know, reading the posts that he would write. He would answer fans' questions, and he was really, you know, he created a window, he opened a window into the very opaque world of TV production at a time when there was really no way to learn how a TV show was made outside of, you know, working in TV and, you know, learning from mentors and from experience. And he was, I think, the first one to really try to create a window into the process so fans would understand why things happened the way they happened, and, you know, what the challenges were and what the process was for things to go from, you know, concept to a finished product on your screen. And, you know, that for me was as, you know, kind of impactful and entrancing as the story of the actual show itself, I would venture to say.
No, that's definitely. I mean, JMS, you know, his regular communication at that time was probably, you know, amazing to have interactions with your show's creator in real time, since that was not a thing, barely a thing then, and only a few people. I think like Kevin Smith is the only other person I think come to mind doing the same thing at that time, considering what technology was. But now, Chris, how did you come to Babylon 5?
Well, that's super easy. That was all of you guys. The reason I would watch Babylon 5, because I didn't have cable growing up. I didn't have cable until college, actually. So I just never had it. So I never had TNT. I couldn't watch it on my own. But yeah, it was because all of you were watching it. So sometimes you'd get together. I remember there was a big gathering for, I think it was the Rangers movie.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I love the disappointment and the weight that I hear behind that. Oh. But yeah, it was mostly listening to you guys talking about it, and then it was sometime after college that I was like, you know, I should finally get through this. But you know, this is more to do with JMS and his work as an artist and the impact that he had on the genre than anything else. Because I'll be honest, I wasn't interested in Babylon 5. I was more interested in it because all of you were, and I wanted to be part of the conversation. It was more important to me so that I could be part of the group than it was that I was actually interested in it, because I think by the time it was really on my radar and I was maybe, you know, watching sometimes with y'all, it was so far along. You know, it was so far along that I didn't have a lot of context, and at the time, I think my interests were just very different. You know, I thought of Star Wars as sci-fi, which it wasn't, and at the time, I even started thinking of Farscape as sci-fi, which it isn't. You know, so I was watching space opera and thinking that's sci-fi, and that was where my interest, you know, that's where my interest lay. So, you know, I think, even though I don't strictly think of B5 as being science fiction, I think it's further along the path than either of those, you know, Farscape or Star Wars. So I really only came to it so that I could be part of the conversation. And since then, I am more interested in it as this is going to sound crappy, but I'm going to say it anyway. I am more interested in it as a relic than as anything else. And that's not really fair to JMS, because you know, because I came to it in a time when the things he had pioneered became sort of par for the course. And so So it's hard for me to appreciate it the way that you guys appreciate it. Sorry, Josh, I cut you off.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I know exactly what you mean. I would reframe it slightly. I would say, coming to B5 is like a cultural artifact.
Yeah, there you go. A cultural touchstone. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's good, always good to see the source material of what is now the standard for television making at this point.
Right.
And Joe, how did you come to the B5 universe?
Well, you know the answer to that. I did come to the party late, but it was through my condition, just like Chris. It started with John Gross and I probably arguing over B5 versus Deep Space Nine, because I was a big fan of, and still up.
It's a whole other episode.
Oh yeah, but then
no
James started giving me every week when I came in, every Wednesday when I came in to pick my comics, he would give me 2 or 3 videos or ARC episodes to watch, and I was immediately hooked. And of course, Adrian saw that, and she started giving me cassettes of Buffy, and I was immediately hooked on that too. So yeah, I was through Mint. And John, what you were saying before, how it was a social gathering, a social event to talk about this show. It's very much on point there, because up until B5, networks had what they had water cooler shows, which people would talk about the next day at work. And in the 90s, I guess the 2 biggest water cooler shows were Friends and Seinfeld. Did you see what Joey and Chandler did last night? Did you see what Kramer did last night? And that would last for a few minutes, and you'd laugh and ha-ha, and you'd walk away. But when you started talking about an episode of B5, it just became this in-depth conversation, and you learn things not only about the show but about yourself. So that's a great legacy and a great tribute to the show. So that's how I came to B5.
And since then, I think you've told me you've watched the whole show now, not just the arc. You've watched.
Oh, I've watched the entire. I've got all the DVDs, all 5 of them, all 5 seasons. I've gone through them twice. Last time was about 2 years ago. It's time to pull them out again and watch them again. I'm in the middle of season 2 on DS9. I've finished Next Gen, and I'm headed towards Voyager and then Enterprise, which I want to talk about someday, because that show gets a lot of flack and it doesn't deserve it.
Especially, right?
I think it's in the queue for a future talk.
We need to talk about Enterprise someday.
I'd like to be a guest on that one.
Okay.
Call your shot now.
And Josh,
Yes.
I believe you were the guy who picked Star Trek: The Motion Picture as your favorite Star Trek. Me. I prefer that. Well, I prefer
number
that.
One favorite.
Was it number 1?
It wasn't in any particular order. It wasn't in my top 5. And I would like to mount a defense.
Well, I would like to start that. Well, I'll just drop a bomb here. I prefer that movie as Star Trek Parallel Parking in Space, because of the beginning of that show going around the ship endless. So we got to revisit that someday too.
Yes, definitely. Well, we have a little bit of time left in here, so before we wrap this episode up, is there any final thoughts or feelings anyone wants to express about the future of the new series coming to us?
Please God, let it be good.
That's a good one. I agree with that. So I hope it's. We all hope. I think that's good. Hopefully, surprisingly good for some of us. Anything else?
I think that from the production standpoint, it's going to be a good show. We don't have to worry about that. I think the CW is going to put enough money into it. But I think what I would really look forward to or expect from it is, this was the inspiration for JMS. This is something that he's told the story a few times about how he came to Babylon 5 in the first place. It was a revelation in a shower, or that was more of a long-term construct that he had. But this is sort of his. I don't know what the term for it would be, but this is like his grand work. And if he's going to revisit it, as long as it's not just him being sentimental about something that he did in the past, it could be something that's a little bit more attuned to today, and in a way that space opera doesn't always get to. I love the fact that everybody's been into The Expanse, because that's been really good. It's touched on a lot of things that are relevant today, but it doesn't quite get to that water cooler level that you say, oh my God, did you see what this touched on? And what I want out of this show is I want him to strike some nerves. I want him to make us a little bit uncomfortable, and bring it in a direction where we're gonna have to talk about it. There's gonna be something that makes us, both compelling to it, but maybe a little bit uncomfortable. Because looking back, Babylon 5 was uncomfortable at times. Watching, as Josh said, watching the stand-in for the Federation go down as the moral bad guys, and that had to be, rescued from their own awful decisions. I think if he has something up his sleeve that's going to be, as controversial but as important, that's what I would want out of the show. Otherwise, it's just sort of more space opera.
I would agree with that. And so far, I think that all signs point to that's what we will be getting. I think that's certainly what JMS intends to give us. I think that's what he has in mind, is something along the lines of what you describe. I don't think he is interested in just, retelling the same story with a modern, production values and a modern sensibility. I think the same kind of questions and beliefs that were the animating force of the original story, I think he's interested in revisiting those, but that does not necessarily result in the same show. For example, I'm hoping that we don't have any of the same characters. I think that using the setup, the scenario as sort of a jumping off point for a story that touches on similar themes, but that is ultimately something that deviates from the story of the original B5, I think is what I am looking for. And I think what I'm really interested in seeing is what sort of JMS sees as the essentialness, the essential qualities of Babylon 5 that he carries over, versus what are the specific details that are, I don't want to say were incidental, but were sort of things that grew out of the DNA in the 90s that may not grow into the same characters or storylines. I think that's what I'm really curious to see. How much of what was in the original show will be carried over into this new show. Because, when somebody asks you, like, what is Babylon 5 about, I'm not really sure what to say beyond it's a space station in the future, and, it's sort of an inflection point in not only human history, but sort of galactic history. Like you say, it's the story of John Sheridan. I think it's a mistake to say that. I don't think that it is the story of John Sheridan. I think that in some ways the show that we got turns out to have a lot to do with John Sheridan. But I think, that character was more the vessel to deliver a lot of this story. And, the interesting thing is that if you go back and you read the original outline that JMS wrote for the story of the whole series before it actually was sold and went into production, it's a very different story. And I, as happens when you start to write a story or create a story, you set out with your intentions and the places that you want to explore and the things that you you think you will probably get into. But as it develops and you get into it, you get new ideas. You realize that some of the things that you had in mind to do may not actually work the way that you intended, and it's sort of it's a cliche to say, but the story and the characters kind of they take on a life of their own, and the story starts to tell you what it is. And I think something very similar will happen with this show.
I'm sure that'll be. We'll see how much DNA is left, but I'm sure as he's writing it now, again with what we've all said about the current times we live in and how much influence that has in his new story, it'll definitely change what was previous. That he will have to create new characters or new stories or new directions in order to accommodate these new thoughts. Chris, you got a final thought?
Yeah, just that I that is one thing that I will say that I think is very promising. Besides the fact that JMS is working on this, because if he is, I'm not worried about whether it's good or bad. It'll be good. But the fact that he said straight up that we're not going to be seeing the same characters in a lot of ways, because how do you replace Stephen First as Veer? You don't. How do you replace Mira Furlan as? I don't want to see somebody else as Delenn. I have no need for that. I don't know how you tell the same story without Jakar. So at this point, that to me is very promising. I feel about this show the way that I feel about my friends at this point is that I have enough and I'm good. Like there are a lot of really amazing people out there, but I'm not really interested in making new friends because I don't have a lot of time for the friends that I have now anyway, and I'd rather keep working on those, building those relationships than starting new ones. So what I hope B5 does, because even if it is a great water cooler show, and even if there is a lot to tease apart, and I'm sure there will be, and a lot to dissect, and I am looking forward to having those conversations, and I'll keep up with it for the sake of the conversation. I don't need that. I have enough stories, I think, that I are on my list that I haven't gotten to yet, and enough in my. So what I hope for B5 is actually not for me, because I don't care about what it does for me. What I hope it does is I hope it has the same kind of awe-inspiring impact on new viewers as the old one had on so many others. I hope that it sparks the kind of conversation and the kind of critical thinking and the kind of creativity that the original sparked for so many other people. That's what I want to see it do. I want it to be, we've talked in the past about how, there is a generation for whom the prequels are their Star Wars. And there will be a generation now for whom the sequels will be their Star Wars. And that's not a conversation I'm looking to get into now. It's just the acknowledgement that different generations own different. We've talked about it with comic books too. This was my Batman growing up. This was your Batman growing up. I want this generation's B5 to be to them what our generation's B5 was to us.
I think that's a great sentiment, John.
Yeah, I want to share that sentiment, because that is, the idea of it going generation to generation. I'm looking at a text I sent to Josh when we first heard the news, and I was talking about sort of how children oftentimes want to hear the same story over and over again at bedtime. They don't get bored by it. As you get older, you don't want the same thing, but you find that you tell stories to people, and you tell them over generations. You tell them, whether it's to your kids, grandkids, writers tell them, but they take on their own lives. And here we have the privilege of it being the same creator, and it's going to be with his voice at a mature age. And I realized I'm sort of like that kid. I'm here to hear that story again, and I'm really excited for others to hear it in whatever his voice is today, because I think that's going to create its own sort of new entity. It won't be the same show, and that's what I really want it to be. Is not the same show. The way that Battlestar Galactica was thematically similar in some ways, but really had its own amazing offering. That's what I think this has the potential to be. But if there are going to be some of the same beats, some of the same stories, I'm there for it, because sometimes you want to hear that same classic concept just in an updated form that's relevant to you today.
I love that. I agree.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Joe, I think it'll
Very
be the
nice.
last thought before we wrap things up today.
Stories change, but the need to tell stories is innate in humans, and we need new stories. Whether we're talking about the Greek mythology or Norse mythology or our superheroes, which are our 21st century mythology, these stories need to be told. And again, like everybody said here, I think we're all in agreement that JMS has the ability, more than most people in this industry, to do that and to do it well. And my fingers are crossed. I wasn't expecting this. I'm still a little, skeptical about the platform it's going to be on, the CW, but, go for it, JMS, go for it.
I think that's a great point and sentiment to leave on. So I want to thank everybody who is on this podcast today. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome, very much so.
Thank you, Chris.
Always my pleasure.
Josh, thank you for coming on as a guest.
My pleasure.
And John, thank you for coming on as a guest.
Oh, my pleasure. This is just a great way of sort of rehashing those old times in a way.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah. And I want to thank the listeners of this podcast. We apologize for some of the technical hiccups, but I think overall it'll be still is a great listening experience for you. If you're interested in reaching us, we have an email you can reach us at secretoriginsmc@gmail.com. We have a Facebook group, Secret Origins of Mint Condition, that you are open to join and continue this conversation. And this will not be our last conversation of Babylon 5. This is probably the start of future conversations about the new show, but also returning to the old show, and also an opening to future conversations about JMS and his work, since it has influenced all the people in this room to some degree. So thank you for listening, and we will talk to you soon.